Any wrestling promoter will tell you that you constantly must look towards youth if you want to keep your roster fresh. And that's why having a next generation of 20-somethings preparing to succeed at any given time is so important. But just who are the 20 best wrestlers in their 20s in the industry today? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now, starting with Rhea Ripley. Yes, despite still only being 28, Rhea Ripley has already risen very high in the wrestling world. Hell, as this stands right now, she's arguably the biggest star in all of women's wrestling, and that's a testament to the it factor she has. But it wasn't like she just snapped her fingers and got to this point overnight. No, Mommy had to do a lot of hard work before she made it to this point, with her first rising to prominence down in NXT UK, where she became that brand's champion for a while. And once she was done in NXT UK, it would be NXT proper which would be her next step, with her there repeating the achievement of becoming the top dog in the division after she dethroned Shayna Baszler in order to do so in December of 2019. That said, all of this would be mere table setting for the main roster run which followed, a main roster run which fully got going when she developed her current Mommy character after shacking up with Dominik Mysterio, and from there went on to win multiple world titles. And because she's still only 28, there's so much more Rhea Ripley has yet to do. But what about an old rival of Rhea's, another 20-something who currently works over in AEW and goes by the name of Toni Storm? Of course, if you're a fan of places like Stardom over in Japan, then you'll have known about Toni Storm for a long time already, but it's only been in the past couple of years that she's truly ascended to the level of superstardom. And that's because after her run in WWE came to an end and she jumped over to AEW, she'd eventually developed the gimmick of Timeless Toni Storm, a classic-era Hollywood movie starlet. Really then, is it any surprise she's such a big name in Jacksonville today? And that she's already a 4-time women's world champion there? Accolades which she can put right up against her NXT UK women's title win and her red belt run in Stardom? No, it shouldn't be. And it shouldn't be a shocking statement to say she's going to continue to be a big name for years to come. But let's move away from the women for a moment and over to the men instead, someone else on the current AEW roster who's still in their 20s, MJF. Seriously now, here's a guy who's been a clear superstar since day one, and that became apparent right as AEW began in 2019 because of all the young guys they had on the roster back then. Maxwell Jacob Friedman was the person who stood out the most by a mile. But then why wouldn't he? Because with his Roddy Piper-like ability to talk on the mic and his ability to have quietly great matches in the ring, it was always going to be a matter of time until AEW pushed him to the moon. And when that push came, it came big for MJF, as his year-long world title run in All Elite Wrestling saw him get to main event All In 2023, a show which to this day holds the record for the most tickets ever sold to a single wrestling event. Needless to say then, that was quite a feather in his cap, especially as it stands today he remains just 29. Where will he go from here? Who knows? Maybe he stays in AEW long term? Maybe he jumps to WWE? Or maybe, based on his recent movie work in the likes of Happy Gilmore 2, he moves over to Hollywood. Should he stay in AEW, however, Max will no doubt be a pillar of that company for many years to come. And while he's doing that, over in WWE, their next ace may very well be rising up in the form of our next subject, Bron Breakker. That's right, anyone who's been watching over the past couple of years will know all too well how much of a phenomenon Bron Breakker is already. And the reason for that is because he apparently took all the best physical aspects of his father Rick Steiner and his uncle Scott Steiner and just mixed them into one tidy package. As you would expect then, this has seen him find quite a lot of success in WWE already, with his being a multi-time NXT World Champion and multiple-time Intercontinental Champion, despite still only being 27. Really, this is a clear-cut example of a guy who's just undeniable in every way, and someone who, barring any unfortunate injury, will surely be the face of WWE over the next decade or so, or at very least will be in competition for that spot with Jacob Fatu. The only question is, when will his push fully get started at that main event level with him winning a world title on the main roster? Could this happen as soon as WrestleMania next year? It's possible, especially if his current stablemate Seth Rollins is still World Heavyweight Champion by then. But Bron Breakker isn't the only young star waiting for that first world title win on Raw, as the same thing could be said about our next subject too, Roxanne Perez. Now there's a reason Roxanne Perez has the nickname of the Prodigy, and that's because, despite being only 23 years old, barely even old enough to legally drink, she's already proven herself to be one of the best young women's wrestlers out there. And all this goes back as far as her late teens, as that was when she was first making a name for herself by working for Ring of Honor and there becoming their youngest ever women's champion. Obviously though, since that point it's been WWE where she's been honing her craft, quickly outshining other women around her who are a decade or more her senior. So it should come as no surprise that after absolutely dominating the developmental scene by holding onto that brand's women's title for so long it basically became her own personal property, Roxy has since been moved up to the main roster where she's become the newest member of the Judgment Day. Where will this take her next? Wherever she wants to be taken, we'd imagine, as with her only now entering her mid-20s, she still has a lifetime left in which to continue to get better. And if current storylines are going the way we think they're going, a good part of that future could be spent on screen with our next subject, Dominik Mysterio. Now, given he's the son of the legendary Rey Mysterio and the kayfabe son of the equally legendary Eddie Guerrero, it might seem like a given that Dominik Mysterio was always destined to be a star. But during his early years on the WWE roster, this was not the case, as for a while there, he really felt like more of a David Flair than a Charlotte Flair. But then something happened. He joined the Judgment Day and unlocked a heel side to himself, which almost instantly turned him into one of the most over characters in the entire company. Needless to say then, since this point it's been all good things for Dirty Dom. Whether it's been Rhea Ripley by his side or Liv Morgan, he's continued to rise up the ranks to the point that now, despite still only being 28, he's already a two-time North American champion and one-time Intercontinental champion. And given the fact he's almost felt like he's been on the verge of turning babyface at certain points in the last few months, we could see a situation where fan demand takes him to the level of a world title eventually. When will this happen? We'll just have to wait and see, and while we're doing so, we'll be keeping an eye on a similar quick rise another young performer is going through, this time back over in AEW. That's right, it's time to talk about Kyle Fletcher. Now, if you were watching New Japan as recently as a few years ago, then you'd already have been aware of Kyle Fletcher as a hot young blue chip prospect, but even then, few would have imagined he'd be rising quite as high as he has. And that's because since joining the AEW roster in 2023, he'd quickly go from being a tag team act alongside Mark Davis to one of the future top-level players of the singles division. Yes, there's a reason that as things stand right now, Fletcher is the TNT champion. He's just become that undeniable. Honestly, between him and his current stablemate Konosuke Takeshita, it's going to be a race to see who wins that AEW world title first. And when you take into account the fact that the Australian is still just 26 years old, that's quite an achievement, as here's a guy who could very well be a future ace for AEW. It's a scary thought, isn't it? To know someone can be that good at such a young age? It's almost intimidating, but incredibly fun to watch. And that same status of being a bit of a prodigy can also be applied to our next subject, another woman of the current day WWE roster, though this time not Roxanne Perez. No, this time we're talking about the one, the only, Tiffany Stratton. 26. That's how old Tiffany Stratton currently is. It's an age which takes you aback a little bit when you think about what she's already achieved. After all, despite only being in the WWE system since 2021, she's already become a one-time NXT Women's Champion, a one-time Miss Money in the Bank, and the current reigning and defending WWE Women's Champion. Obviously, then it goes without saying that this has been quite a fast rise to the top, but not an undeserved one. As if you look at the women's roster in WWE today, Tiffany is easily one of the standout figures. She's certainly held her own against the likes of Charlotte Flair, and she hasn't looked out of place with that main roster gold around her waist. Really, it's just a question of how long she'll hold it at this point, and how many more times she'll win it back after she does eventually drop it. It might be a case that as the years go on, Tiffy time becomes the dominant force in all of WWE, even more so than someone like a Rhea Ripley. Or who knows, maybe one of the current day NXT roster members will rise up and take this spot from her. Someone like perhaps our next subject, Jordynne Grace. Yes, Jordynne has been a huge success story of the WWE and TNA partnership. And the reason for that is because it's her who's been able to make a name for herself and move up to a bigger platform with the most ease. But then it should have been a given that Grace would eventually get signed by WWE, as with her bodybuilder physique and impressive in-ring work, she's long been the standout of the Knockouts division up in Toronto. Come on now. While working in TNA, she was able to become a 3-time Knockouts World Champion, a 1-time Knockouts Tag Team Champion, and a 1-time Digital Media Champion, Impact's intergender title. And all that success has come to her despite the fact she's still only 29 years old. So you'd expect it would just be a matter of time before she starts winning gold in WWE too, and in the process proves herself to be one of the key players in that division's future. It really is just a question of whether she'll go for the NXT title first, or make her claim at a main roster piece of hardware instead. Given how quickly the likes of Tiffany Stratton and Julia were called up, we could see Jordynne be made a Raw or SmackDown exclusive at any time now. so it's not out of the realms of possibility to think that she'll be holding gold there before the year is out. Before she does that though, she'll have to settle some business with her current rival down on the developmental brand, another 20-something success story in Blake Monroe. Of course, the Blake Monroe name is one which has only been given to this Englishwoman pretty recently, as prior to that she was known as Mariah May. And it was under this name that she had a very meteoric rise over the past year or two, as after first cutting her teeth on the Stardom roster during the early to mid 2020s, she'd sign on the dotted line with AEW and there instantly get a mega push by being part of one of the best storylines that company has ever produced, her partnership and eventual feud with Toni Storm. Yes, this was the moment that Mariah fully arrived, as it would be at Wembley Stadium in 2024 that she beat Toni to become the AEW Women's World Champion, with this being a belt she went on to hold well into 2025. Since dropping that title, however, she's moved over to WWE, and it's there she currently finds herself working her way up the NXT roster under the new moniker of Blake Monroe. Where will Blake Monroe take her? If her trajectory is the same in WWE as it was in AEW, all the way to the top and very quickly. Sure, she's still only 27, but that hasn't stopped her from being a massive hit in the industry thus far. So expect to see Blake Monroe as a world champion soon, if not on NXT, then on Raw or SmackDown instead. And while you're at it, expect the same level of success from our next subject too, Javon Evans. Now, if you're an indie wrestling fan, then you'll likely have first become familiar with Javon Evans back during the early 2020s when he was working for places like Deadlock Pro Wrestling and there making a name for himself. Since 2023, however, it's been all about WWE for the man formerly known as Jay Malachi. And while he's yet to win any gold on the NXT roster, this seems like it's something which will happen at any time now, as he's already proving himself to be one of the hottest young talents on the roster. Given he's only 21 then, a staggeringly young age, that speaks great things about his future prospects. And in such a short space of time, he's already left a footprint on the industry, which will likely only get bigger as time goes on and he moves up to a Raw or a SmackDown. Will world title success await him there? It feels like a given that it will. And when it does, he'll truly move to the level of being undeniable. But what of our next subject? Is their future just as undeniable? Well, let's find out right now by taking a look at them. Who are we talking about here? Why, Leon Slater, of course. Now, if you thought Javon Evans was young, you haven't heard anything yet. And that's because in Leon Slater, we have someone who is even younger, 20 years old to be precise, not even old enough to legally drink alcohol in the US. But even if he is still only a baby in many ways, that hasn't stopped Slater from making a big splash in the industry, primarily on the indies, where he's been a standout of promotions such as Game Changer Wrestling, Rev Pro, and Progress. That said, since 2023, his main home has been TNA, and it's there he continues to wrestle to a high level today, much higher than anyone his age has any right to be wrestling at. Hell, it's there that he currently stands tall as the reigning and defending X Division champion. Obviously then, given the fact TNA now has a close working relationship with WWE, it's easy to see a future where the Englishman ends up in WWE. And if that happens, he'll be able to wrestle in front of an even bigger audience as they'll all get to see just how good he is despite his young age. Where will he be by the time he's 30? At this rate, he could be on top of the world. Who knows, he might even be on Raw or SmackDown getting into big-time main event programs with our next subject, another 20-something who's come a long way in the industry despite his youth, Austin Theory. Now, there was a period back during the early 2020s where it looked like Austin Theory was being groomed to be WWE's next top star. And while that hasn't exactly come to pass, he's still achieved a hell of a lot considering the fact he's only 28. This is, after all, a two-time United States champion, one-time tag team champion, and one-time Mr. Money in the Bank. So there's clearly a lot he has to offer. But then those skills he has at his disposal were always clear as far back as his days in places like Evolve. So that shouldn't come as a surprise. Will he ever make it to that tippy top level? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. All it would take is another strong push and he'd certainly have a shot at it. And time is on his side, so it's not like there's any rush to do such a thing. No, Austin Theory has the luxury of playing the long game here and waiting for his moment to strike, by which point he might be able to break through that glass ceiling and fully reach the potential of the man who pinned John Cena at WrestleMania 39. But let's move back over to the women again for a second, as it's there we find our next great wrestler under the age of 30, another person who's no stranger to a mid-card title on the WWE main roster, a woman who's known to the world today as Lyra Valkyria. Really, the idea that Lyra Valkyria is still only 28 should be shocking, as she's already achieved so much in her career. Hell, in WWE alone, she's become a one-time NXT Women's Champion, one-time Women's Tag Team Champion, and was the first ever Women's Intercontinental Champion. Quite a lot for someone who hasn't even hit 30 yet, isn't it? And at the rate she's going, her stock is only going to rise higher as the years progress. Why is that? Well, because Lyra is already building up a reputation for herself as the workhorse of her division. And that can only leave her in good stead then, as great in-ring performers will always be in demand, especially if they've still got years left on the clock on account of their youth. Yes, we should expect much more of this Irish woman in the future, whether that be title success, main event matches, or just general bangers, just as you should also expect much more of another rising female star of that company, a current, somewhat unexpected ace of the NXT brand in Jacy Jayne. Of course, when we say Jacy Jayne is an unexpected ace of NXT, it's because few had pegged her to reach the level she has already. After all, this is someone who's still only 29 and who was, up until a few years ago, very much seen as being a step behind her two Toxic Attraction stablemates, Mandy Rose and Gigi Dolan, in terms of importance. But ever since leaving that group behind and forming her own stable in Fatal Influence, Jacy's rise to the top has been swift. So swift has it been, in fact, it would be in May of 2025 that she shocked the wrestling world by beating Tiffany Stratton for the NXT Women's title, and then would go on to become a double champ by also winning the TNA Women's belt too. Needless to say then, we see a lot in her future. And that means she'll likely be on the main roster before long, there continuing to rise up the card as she inevitably sets her sights upon some main roster gold. Will she do this as part of Fatal Influence, or will she have gone solo by then? We guess we'll just have to wait and find out. Who knows? That might actually be the point we get the full-fledged Jacy Jayne babyface run. And this could even see her end up partnering with another top babyface rising female star in WWE today, someone else who's currently holding down some gold on NXT. Who are we talking about this time? Who else but Sol Ruka. Now sometimes you see a wrestler and it takes a while to realize they're going to be a big success, and sometimes you see someone and you know right away that they're destined to hit it big. This latter statement was certainly the case with Sol Ruka when she first joined the WWE developmental brand in 2022, and anyone who thought that would have since been vindicated because as it stands right now, she's the current NXT Women's North American Champion. As you would expect then, with Sol still only being 25, it should only be a hop, skip, and a jump from there before she goes on to even greater success, possibly even the NXT Women's title. And after that, well, the main roster seems like a sure thing. We really don't see how she could fail at this point, as with her athletic ability and her look, there's no reason fans shouldn't be taking to Sol Ruka as a future player in waiting. Hell, by the time she's 30, we'd be shocked if she wasn't already a main roster world champion. And that's a statement which could also apply if we head back over to the men for a moment and look at our next subject, someone who seems like an absolute dead cert for a huge push on Raw or SmackDown when he finally gets there, Oba Femi. Come on now, guys like Oba Femi don't come along very often. And it looks like WWE is aware of this, as ever since the big man debuted on the NXT roster back in 2023, he's been quickly rising up the ranks. So quickly has he done this, in fact, that as things stand as of the time of this video's recording, he's on top of the world in Florida as the NXT World Champion. Really, the next step for him should be to get him on the main roster soon, as even if he is still only 27, there's still no point to having the big man waste time in developmental for too long. No, in Oba Femi, you should have a main event level act on either Raw or SmackDown, someone who could play the role of babyface or heel, depending on what's asked of him, and who can work with guys like Cody Rhodes, CM Punk, and Roman Reigns, in the process hopefully bringing himself up to their level. Of course, you don't have to be a part of the NXT system though in order to be a big future star of WWE. No, some young talents have another pipeline toward eventual main roster success now, and we're not talking about TNA. Rather, we're talking about WWE's most recent acquisition, AAA, and one of their top young acts, El Hijo del Vikingo. Yes, El Hijo del Vikingo has been a top guy in AAA for some time now, and he's been using his increased notoriety to rise even further up the pecking order of the wrestling world, with his anti-gravity style of high-risk performance always making him stand out with audiences. As you would expect then, many believe the eventual destination for El Hijo del Vikingo is WWE, something which would give him a chance to work with the Rey Fenixes and Rey Mysterios of the world, and only further raise his stock as a result. But it's not like he needs to be in a rush to do this, because as it stands today, he's still only 28. No, all Vikingo needs to do is keep doing what he's been doing, and further success will surely find him, just as it surely will for our next subject, Zarya. That's right, the newest of the young exports to come out of Australia, Zarya is already following in the footsteps of performers such as Rhea Ripley, Toni Storm, and Kyle Fletcher. And the way she's been doing this as of late has been by joining the NXT roster. Sure, she's still very much in her early days in Florida, but given she's only 26, it's not like she's in any rush to rise up the card. No, she can afford to take the scenic route when it comes to her rise. Perhaps she'll do this by eventually challenging her current on-screen buddy Sol Ruka for that women's North American title. Or perhaps she'll bypass this entirely and end up going for the women's world title instead. Whichever she chooses, on account of her sheer power and size, we expect Zarya to be a big player in WWE for years to come yet, with her filling much the same role that performers such as Chyna or Beth Phoenix have filled in the past. Yes, this is someone who could very easily end up on the opposite side of the ring from an Io Sky or a Bianca Belair soon enough, perhaps even shocking them by beating them in short order and winning the top prize right away. Or who knows? Maybe she takes the slow path instead. Again, at her age, she has plenty of years left barring an unfortunate injury, so there's no sense in rushing herself before she feels ready. And if you need any proof that the long game can work for someone in the WWE, you need look no further than our next subject, because despite being there since 2016 now, Tyler Bate is still a very young man with a long future ahead of him. And when we say young man, we mean it, as Tyler is still only 28, younger than some of the other people we've looked at today. Obviously, then this could be a hard fact to compute then when you consider that he first made a splash in WWE way back during the days of the tournament to crown the first ever United Kingdom champion, a title the Englishman ended up winning as it happened. And even before that, he was a noted figure on the UK independent scene. Of course, back then though, Tyler Bate truly was a baby, and that means over the decade that he spent in WWE working in NXT UK, NXT, and the main roster, either as a singles act or a member of tag teams like Mustache Mountain and the New Catch Republic, he's been slowly going through his 20s to the point that now, in 2025, he's only just reaching the end of them. Does this mean his breakout moment is about to happen then? We certainly hope so, as he'd be more than deserving of some title success, maybe getting a run with the Intercontinental or United States belt for a while. But again, as with everyone else today, it's not like this has to happen tomorrow, as Tyler Bate is very much still a performer of the future. Someone who, like all the other great acts out there in their 20s, will be the ones carrying the business forward into the 2030s and beyond.